Hi, everyone. It's great to join you today. I want to just jump right into it because I am new to both big data and politics, but I love asking questions. A little bit about myself. I'm the founder of a company called 8 Inc. On the side, my passion project is something that's going to be, you'll hear more about it in Pasadena pretty soon, but I'm very interested in innovation districts and how they are evolving and creating high value jobs, including technology and incorporating investments. I myself am a founder of a couple of startups, venture funded, now moving into the investment world. So you'll be seeing a little bit more about me, and you can always Google me if the SEO is working right these days. But let's get right into it. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Alex Schaffert, Director of Digital Media, KPCC, recently launched a new KPCC, a National Public Radio Initiative on Big Data. We have Ed Honowitz. Ed is educational policy advisor to Senator Carol Liu's office and an expert on big data. We have Maya Hutchinson, senior organizer of Nation Builder, a company which makes use of big data for political election campaigns. And we have Jan Perry with us, General Manager, Economic and Workforce Development Department for the City of Los Angeles. So let's just get right into it. If each of you can just give us so here's the thing. Big data is a term, and it's almost like a buzzword these days that's thrown around by so many people. And from a layman's terms point of view, what does it mean to each of you, and how do you incorporate it currently in the company or the scope of work that you do?
Shall I dive in? Can you guys hear me? All right, so yeah, I was wondering about how we're going to define big data, and sometimes, a joke that we like to make in our meetings is that I'm also very happy with small data. I like all kinds of data, which I think makes me a geek by Andy's definition. But the difference between big data is that you're really aggregating large sets of data, and you're looking both at aggregate patterns in that data. So, as can we slice that data into different groups, and can we draw conclusions how different groups are, let's say, different groups of listeners are behaving differently. But it really gets interesting if you can connect the data to the atomic level and get down to individual people, and how are individual people navigating a website or navigating an app or navigating a government website and are using government programs. And of course the promise of big data is that by having these really large data sets, obviously there are companies like Amazon and Target and for perhaps most of all Facebook, who are using that data to squeeze the last dollar out of a particular business venture. But the idea would be that there's perhaps potential in government and also in nonprofits to use data patterns and to use big data to create better services for audiences, to make something like public radio more sustainable, because we have a deeper understanding of how people want to support a service like that. So I think there is a hope that big data doesn't just serve commercial purposes, but that it can, as Andy said, make our lives better.
Great. And Ed?
I just want to clear up. It says I'm an expert on big data. When Sophia Viklin asked me to speak, I had told her I was an expert on big Danish and other pastries. And so most of the work that I do is education policy and work at the state level. And for us, it's an issue of trying to get, the state collects vast amounts of data on all kinds of things, from, student testing data to data on service delivery, and, you name it, there's some stat associated with a government program. The real challenge is trying to take that and, come up with usable information that drives policy and helps people understand what the issues are and improve outcomes. And what I've been spending a fair amount of time on lately is trying to get agencies to link data and develop cross-agency data sharing agreements and plans and such. And that's a huge challenge. And it's not all about the technical challenge. It's much more about the culture of how agencies work, and people share or, covet their data and don't want to, share things with other folks. And it's also about the kind of fear of issues of litigation around privacy and other kinds of potential areas where someone might let something out and it turns around and bites them. So lots of challenges of how to take information in the public sector and really come up with something that drives better outcomes.
Great, thank you. Maya?
Hi. My role at Nation Builder is actually to empower individuals and organizations and campaigns to use their own data. So that actually, to Alex's point, is a lot to do with small data. So you can collect voter information, or if someone RSVPs to an event, or if they follow you on Twitter. That's really meaningful information, and that's data that's really applicable to you as an individual, and it's not about these large spreadsheets with hundreds of columns and decimal points and numbers that blur in front of your eyes, but actually being able to see it and visualize it and know who your audience is and know who the people that are engaging with you are and who your voters are and who your constituents are, to be able to use that and empower yourself or your organization to be more successful. So it's not about a scary spreadsheet of information or about a giant company taking information from you, but actually harnessing that data for yourself and for your organization to grow and to hopefully win.
So for me, in the life that I have now as a general manager of economic and workforce development, I work with work source centers that reach out to populations, to at-risk populations, people who are formerly homeless, people who have had interaction with the criminal justice system, people who have developmental disabilities, the incumbent worker, which is, I guess, code work for an adult who lost their job and needs to go back to work, and of course, building for young people and trying to prepare them for these emerging centers in healthcare, in technology, and in those job opportunities that will pay them in the long run a higher wage. And so for me, data is a way to build a narrative. Data is a way to build a case. Data is also a way to seek federal funding and private philanthropic money also. And so data is a means to an end. And at the end of whatever pipeline you're in to use data, big data, I think the biggest change that I've seen over the years is the integration of data sets to develop a strategy that can be applied in many areas, but it's called an integrated service delivery model, so that you take data from various disciplines and you're more effectively able to serve a client or a targeted population than we have been in the past, with an infusion of different types of services to really move the dial on whatever issue it is you're working on. But at the end of all that data, there has to be an outcome.
Great. And so with this panel and also the audience included, we have an audience here who is fairly ahead of the curve when it comes to a lot of technology and the adaptation, and many of you are early adopters. However, I'm sure in the real world or in companies or situations or organizations where you deal with non-technical folks and you have to enroll them in, coming on board, whether it's a project or just getting things done, what are some challenges and how are you overcoming them? What are some recurring issues when you hear about big data? And Jan, we were mentioning that. How do you get everyone on board, or how do you explain that to folks?
I think you explain it as a way to tell your story. And whatever your objective is, whether it's in the mental health profession or in education, or even to teach a generation of young people who don't even envision themselves as having a career in technology, data can assist you, me, the people who are trying to change that in building a case as to why we need funding to be able to do that. We had a study done by a big accounting firm on our summer youth employment program for last year. And the kids who go anywhere from 14 to 24 years old, of course, they say they want to be firefighter, a police officer, a nurse, maybe even a doctor every now and then. But nowhere in there did anybody ever mention going into a career in technology. And so that's a statistic that is worth noting, and we need to peel back the layers on that and figure out how we change that. So we were talking about just seeing women on television, and just this evening, and them in roles in television using technology to change people's perception as to how women can be engaged and involved in technology, and that becomes a new norm or new normal for people who don't see it yet.
So I want to build a little bit on what Jen is saying, because you asked sort of what are some of the issues that I'm seeing in our companies, in our organizations, and I think it's important to point out that data is not equivalent just to buying a system. Your company will not be sophisticated and be a great user of data just by implementing what's called a customer relations management system, for example. Just buying Salesforce is not enough in order to make your company or your organization or your government more competitive. And what you need people who can go into that system, figure out what the numbers are telling us, and then translate that into actionable steps for the organization to make it better. So I just want to underline what Jen is saying, that it takes people who are comfortable with just quantitative analysis and can translate the numbers into actionable steps that the business, the nonprofit, the government can take to improve any problem.
And Ed, I'm sure, or Maya, but Ed, in your case, I was wondering, in a situation where you're working in a political office and maybe you're that expert on big data that everyone goes to, what kind of challenges do you come across in your field and what you're doing?
I think a lot of the challenges are, as I said, it's more of cultural challenges in terms of the culture of different agencies than it is technical challenges as far as systems and integrating the technology. So that translates into things like, gee, I don't know if I should share this data because it might make our organization look bad, or I don't know whether I'm going to get sued if I let this out. No one has made clear where the guidelines and the parameters are around the release of data. So a lot of it has to do less, with, can we build systems? And in California, building a comprehensive data system is so expensive that, in general, it doesn't happen. So I mean, you even see pieces of legislation that say, this specifically will not add a new field to this data system because they're afraid that it'll get vetoed if there's a cost associated. So what you've got is kind of lots of layers of antiquated systems piled up on top of each other. But the largest part, again, at the end of the day, is really about the culture of sharing, the trust issues, the issues of trying to really make the case for why integrating, the education and the health bureaucracies or the child welfare and education bureaucracies, should be happening because it'll drive better outcomes for kids. It'll drive better outcomes for communities. And, oftentimes it's really much more about how do we, protect our information and make sure that it doesn't show something that would reflect poorly on the work we're doing.
Maya, do you have any challenges, or do you face any?
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that a lot of organizations or campaigns, they have a lot of data. They have a lot of information on what people are doing, what they're saying, but none of it is really talking to each other. And none of it really pulls together in a cohesive manner where people can actually say, oh, look, this person who is a voter in my district also is interested in the environment. They are on social media. But those are all traditionally in very separate places. And it's hard to understand them all because they're all living in very different buckets. So to be able to bring that together, to visualize it in a way that you can understand the people interacting with you, makes it a lot more tangible for people. They're already using Twitter, they're already using a website, they have Facebook, and they understand those technologies to some extent. But where it's most powerful and where you can really drive a deeper understanding is when they actually talk to each other, and that's the power of actually organizing that and bringing it together. And that's probably the biggest hurdle, I think, in many places, but can totally be a very successful outcome when it does happen.
Well, building on that, when those challenges are overcome in these situations, can you give us, any of you, give us a particular example in your case of a project or something that, you know, was a successful example of big data being used in a way that was positive?
Let me find the mic. Hold on. I'm sitting on it. Yeah, you know, when working, historically, the city and the county of Los Angeles have not always worked well together, but I think things have shifted. And I know last summer we were raising money at a pretty fast clip and finding placements for young people to have this employment over the summer for 6 weeks. But we still needed more money. The county realized that we had a delivery system. We have youth source centers, and we were really moving fast. In the county, we have 5 million, 4.5 million people in the city. They have 10 million. So they said, why don't we give you the money that we haven't spent? Because when you receive federal money, you always have, it always has conditions which include spending it no later than a certain date. And so they gave us an enormous amount of money with the understanding that we spend it not just in the city but in the county of Los Angeles, which is fine because, you know, you want to put more people to work because it helps the whole region anyway. And so just by integrating our data, and they saw what we had and we clearly saw what they had, which was money. You know, we were able to help each other, and I'd like to think that data can help create more collaborations like that.
Now, prior to that, I would like the flip side of it. What used to happen in a scenario like that if you didn't have access to big data?
Well, we just raise our money and say, well, you know, unless you're from XYZ zip code, you know, you just go your way. You're in the county, go help yourself, you know. But now it's different because there's no borders on this issue, and that's a good thing. And I've seen that shifting with the issue of homelessness, and again, pooling assets, pooling funding to leverage for even more money. Because some of these issues that we wrestle with, there's no line there as to who it affects and how it affects us.
I think one really great example on the state level in terms of really using data to try and lift up an issue. In 2010, the Stewart Foundation, which works a lot in child welfare issues and education issues, convened a whole group of people and were looking at the issues of foster youth. And in that convening, they were able to eventually get a data MOU between the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services and Child Welfare. And what came out of that was a report called the Invisible Achievement Gap, which really drilled down looking at student achievement of foster youth. And what you found was foster youth are, you know, much more likely to be in the lowest performing schools in the state. Their, you know, graduation rates are, you know, probably the worst of any, you know, subset of students. And because they were able to sort of draw out the data and really provide a glimpse into something that previously wasn't really particularly identified, it started to change the whole conversation and eventually got to the point where when Governor Brown revamped education funding in the state a year and a half, 2 years ago, as that discussion and the policy issues were, you know, getting kicked around regarding that, foster youth were, for the first time, identified as a specific population that school districts needed to be accountable for. They had to show in their local control accountability plans what specific funding they were using to improve services and improve outcomes. So I think that's a real case where, you know, people coming together, looking at information that wasn't previously kind of lifted up to the surface, you know, really affected change in a way that made a difference for people that really needed the assistance.
And again, curious, what would be the flip side of that if big data didn't play a role back in the day where, like, what would have been that outcome?
I mean, I think, you know, it used to be that, there really was not, you weren't looking at disaggregating data when you looked at education outcomes. It was, what was the score of the school or the district? And you had pockets of kids that were left behind because nobody, you could have a lot of high-performing kids masking the performance of a subset that really was, not achieving well. And, you could make the case for, we don't have a problem here because look at this raw, total population score, everything's fine. And so by, requiring that disaggregation of data, you're getting a much better look at what's happening in real, specific smaller populations of kids that, otherwise wouldn't have gotten the attention they need.
Got it. Maya?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who we work with from 1 to 2 person nonprofit organizations to large political campaigns who are a direct success of being able to not only own their own data but run campaigns that are now data driven. When previously with the Obama campaign, there's this huge talk around big data and using that to run, the most effective digital and data-driven campaign. But it wasn't previously really accessible to a city council person or someone running a very local race who can now still be able to do that, who can actually leverage that and take, voter data and take social media data and actually be able to bring that together with actions that people are taking on their website or actions that people are taking, when they knock on their door or call them on the phone. And candidates are able to use this technology across the country. I actually work with a lot of campaigns across Europe as well, who are really innovating this and bringing these data sources together to run really successful, exciting campaigns. One really exciting one for me was actually in Romania. It was a presidential campaign in Romania, which used this to leverage all of the voters across Europe who could vote in Romania and leverage social media and be able to really drive an online engagement to win an election.
So for public radio, there are sort of both more obvious examples and then there are some behind-the-scenes examples. For KPCC, we've really embraced data in our reporting, and we have a data desk that's headed up by Chris Keller. And so we're really trying to use data to really drive home certain stories. We've done a big survey of rent costs in Los Angeles, for example. We published a map that shows how rent costs are distributed. And of course, in journalism, the hope is always that the data helps illuminate a particular issue in a very specific way and perhaps leads to changes. And then behind the scenes, so the project that I'm working on with NPR One is an app called NPR One, and the app is now in the App Store. It's a different way to listen to public radio. It feels like a stream, but it's actually more like Pandora, just for spoken word, so it's individual segments. And using big data techniques, we were able to compare, how do people use that experience if they're only hearing national stories versus if they're hearing national stories with some local reporting sprinkled in. And people who hear the local podcast, the local segments in the stream are much more engaged with the coverage. And for us, that's important because our mission is to engage the audience, get them listening to more content. So, a piece of information like that just really changes our thinking about how can we create a great digital public radio experience.
So I think I hear a lot big data, and then there's privacy issues associated with it. How do you view privacy in context to this? Is there such thing as too much access to big data, and to the point where in a community situation it really might concern a lot of citizens? And how would you address that?
Well, we have to be very concerned about the use of data when it pertains to people who are victims of domestic violence, people's mental health issues, and how that might affect their ability to get employment. The level of information you provide about someone who has had long-term involvement in the criminal justice system, and of course foster children, always have to be protected. So you have to have, there's data, but you have to have an awareness on how you interpret it and what you reveal and who you're helping and who you might actually, in an unintended way, be hurting.
So at the end of the day, you still need people to
You need people,
be
and you
able-
need situational awareness. You need to be very aware of your data set and how you deploy that so that you achieve those outcomes without, again, I hate to choose a buzzword, but unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, in the public sector, there's, you have a huge focus on issues of HIPAA and FERPA, which are the federal laws around privacy for medical information, and then the privacy around educational rights issues. So, the reason you had to, when you went to college, you could either allow your parents to know what you were doing in terms of grades and this and that, or not, right? But it becomes a really, challenging issue to navigate all of that. There's a tendency to want to protect the, every level of privacy, which certainly makes sense. But sometimes the fear of, letting out some information that might get close to crossing, a line somewhere, really prevents the kinds of data exchange that would help improve things. You see it at the school district level all the time, particularly as more districts are trying to do things like school-based health, and they're running into trying to provide services for kids that also might have an insurance company providing, medical services, and having a database of information, but it doesn't, there's no way to access that. Likewise, even if you go through a process of trying to de-identify the information so you can look at big kind of population outcomes and population information, there's still a lot of issues around people being very reluctant to let something out. When you get into small numbers, a small n, you can still identify who's, if there's only 5 kids that, are foster kids at this, very small school district, and, this has just come up in a discussion where there's a lot of, this again was foster youth that are on psychotropic drugs. If the state were to release data about every single school district, in some cases you could actually kind of figure out which kid it was, and suddenly you've run into a problem because you've let their personal medical information out in a way. So lots of challenges, and California is particularly focused on privacy issues.
Maya?
Yeah, we, as a company that deals with a lot of data, we are very unique in that every customer, every person that uses Nation Builder, they actually own their own data. And so that's very unique in a lot of companies where you feel like you're giving a lot of information, or you may have, signed a petition for an organization, but then, 5 other organizations are also contacting you. So, and you're not sure where they got that from. In this case, and especially as a topic that I have a lot, especially with people and campaigns that I work with in Europe, where it's a much even a bigger topic around data privacy and security. It's really unique to actually give people the data and tell them that this is actually yours. You actually own this. It's entirely yours. We don't touch it. We don't sell it. And that gives a much stronger sense of security around what you do and how you're able to manage and engage your own community.
Do you guys feel like you're ahead of the curve on that, or is just that specific, that's something you can do? Because surely on a political level such as that, you can't give every citizen an opportunity to own their data. I'm just curious, when did you guys decide that you wanted to allow users? And what does that exactly mean? Again, taking it back to layman's terms, if you told me, Christine, you own your own data, and I'm like, well, yeah, but you host the information. I'm just trying to, how do you overcome that disconnect?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So if you are a candidate for mayor and you decide to use Nation Builder, you can create an account with Nation Builder called Nation. You can get voter data. You can add social media data, you can add your email list, and you can combine that into a central database that talks to each other. That also integrates with the actions that people take on your website. And all of that data, we do host it, but it is entirely yours. So if you ever want to take it with you, if you ever want to use it for, export it, take it to another place, if you, whatever you are doing with your data, that's your data. We do not take it, we do not sell it. That's entirely owned by the customer.
Interesting. Alex, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would say that, for KPCC, we have a program called Public Insight Network, and it's a big database of people who are sharing very specific stories with us, and these are kept completely confidential. It's really between, the individual and the reporter, and there are also very, very few people who even have access to that information. But for us, it's really powerful because if we're looking for somebody with, who has with a very specific profession, let's say, and a very specific job, then we can go to that database and we can find these people and contact them. But if you're ever part of a survey and you're a KPCC listener, then you should know that this is kept completely confidential, away from our fundraising. It's really almost locked in a safe. And then, on the flip side, when it comes to our membership information, like any business, we protect that information to the absolute best of our abilities, like any other, reputable business would.
So, given that this is an audience, it's called Geek Girl Dinners, what role do you feel, if any, does big data play, or how can it benefit women specifically, whether it's from that angle? Is there any issues or comments on that?
Do you mean women as individuals or women collectively in a particular?
Well, maybe in the case of this audience, women founders or women business owners. How would you like to see the female entrepreneur or geek girl community benefit better from data, or if you have any ideas on
Well,
that?
yeah, I think it opens up new markets that may not have been touched already, and provides you with a pathway that's totally within your control, your own self-empowerment to be able to communicate directly with people who may not realize you're there, you may not realize they're there. I do that on my own, just in reaching across the country to particular types of people whose interests are narrowly defined the way that I define them, because I want to see who's out there and what they're doing and what they're talking about. So the same could apply for women startups, entrepreneurs, women in corporations. And I just think it removes all barriers. So there's no barriers, and you're free to navigate however you want to navigate. And you don't even need really a lot of money to be able to do that.
Well, I would just say, I already mentioned that we're working on a couple of data initiatives, and I've done a little bit of recruiting in the data space, and it's very challenging because there are not that many people who can do this. So I guess if you are a young woman, contemplating graduate school or your career path, if you're looking at, now there are emerging master's programs, sometimes they're associated with library and information science schools. Berkeley has a very attractive program on data science, and there are also organizations in LA. General Assembly, for example, I think is also doing something in that field. And if you can acquire those skills right now, it's a very, very marketable skill at the moment in the job market. So, when we talk about technology, certainly programming is important, and we want more girls and women to enter that field. But quantitative analysis, being able to read data, do interesting things with data, interpret it, explain it to non-technical people, that's, I think, a huge skill and a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, although I don't have a technical background at all, I think any experience working in the tech industry, in innovation, is going to come with using data, no matter what your role is at that company or at that startup. And it's an incredible learning experience, and it's something that I think women should definitely be on the forefront of, and be looking out for opportunities to be involved in technology and to be involved in companies doing that. It's definitely predominantly men. There's a lot of men, but there's a lot of room for women, and a really big space for them, especially as a good voice within technology and data.
It's interesting because it's a little bit of an awkward question even when I ask it, because I come from the angle of, I've spent most of my career going, it's not because I'm a woman, it's because I work hard, or, but it's interesting because I'm just hearing each of you talk about the impact it's made individually, especially you, Jan, when you mentioned how it's been able to affect and narrow down to specific groups. There is an opportunity there to empower, I would feel, right, in from a social aspect, and open up a whole door that I guess, or windows into different areas. So, as much as I am, like, I come from that angle where, I don't want to always talk about it from well, what about women in tech or girls in tech specifically, because big data applies to everything, but it's interesting, the insights you guys share.
So I think one other characteristic that women may bring to this table is a sense of practicality. Because I do a lot of networking, and I know several years ago, many years ago, before they were talking about using drones to deliver consumer goods, and I was having a conversation with somebody about putting a delivery system underneath the freeways that would move goods in something the size of a soda can. And so, anyway, I just said, what are you talking about? Really? And break it down for me, and I gave him a few examples of, so if I buy a bicycle for, my child, how are you going to do that? And it was an interesting idea, and it was great, interesting party discussion, but when you get down to how are you going to do that, you have to step out of the data and into reality, and then talk about the implementation thereof. Otherwise, it's just an idea, and ideas are great, but for what we do, I think all of us, we have to deliver something to either our client or our consumer or the groups that we serve in different ways. We still have to have a deliverable at the end of the day. So,
interesting. Where do you think we are at right now? Like, it was, again, one discussion I would say is several years ago, social media was this big buzzword, and people were trying to figure out what it was, and everybody in every, piece of newspaper or media would be talking about the importance of social media and the impact and how it's going to change. And I feel like in the past couple of years, it's been the case with big data, right? Because maybe people got tired of talking about social media, but big data, are we at the beginning, or are we kind of farther along, or where do you see us in a couple of years with all this? Or do people get used to the fact that they're giving up their privacy? Because again, I feel like I check the checkbox because I want to get into the site, Where are we heading with this, and where does it become a little seamless in our lives, in the offline world?
well, for me, I think big data is always going to be a leveraging tool. And I think big data is always going to be a way to tell a story. And I think you can always continue to refine it and tell a more specific, more targeted, more pointed story about whatever it is you do. And we're all in different, areas. But if you see it from that, I think there's no limit to how you can use it as a predictive tool. But again, we constantly have to interpret it and translate it for lay people so that they can see the practical application or the practical use for that. Even, our city controller has a big data information on his website, and I think that's wonderful. And I have to look at the engagement rate. I haven't looked at it in a long time to see if people are actually going, okay, let's see how my tax dollars are being spent in the area of, tree trimming or street paving or something like that, because you have to hit that sweet spot where people actually see why they should care, and then become engaged in the usage of big data also.
So you mentioned social media, and what I think is interesting is Facebook is social media or is being equated with social media, but underneath the hood, Facebook is all about data. And that data is being sold, and that's how Facebook makes money. So I guess what I would want is I want us as a society to be more educated about how our data is being used, perhaps take greater ownership of it. And I would also hope that data is not just used by commercial companies for commercial gain, but that data is used by governments and by nonprofits in order to achieve positive change. And to that end, I think there are some encouraging signs. There are now groups and organizations. One that I'm aware of is called DataKind, and they attract data scientists who bring the expertise to the table and have, either founded companies or have worked for commercial companies, but they then turn around and via DataKind basically donate their skills in order to solve society's many problems. And yeah, my hope would be that those efforts get attention and that they succeed.
Yeah, I think in part the power is about taking the data and turning it into through some kind of a user interface or ability to display the information in a way that people can digest it and use it. A lot of times there's so much data that people are overwhelmed and you can't actually extract the most meaningful pieces out of it. And I think you see that a lot in the government side. And on the education piece, teachers have lots of data, but if they can't extract it in a way that they can change their teaching practice and know what kids need, a certain amount of attention around a particular thing, then that data isn't really doing anything useful. It's probably burdening them with lots of information that's extraneous. And so it's really all about kind of distilling down, what are the important pieces, where's the, what's this leading you to, and then how's it going to influence what you're doing.
So from a government level, I'm curious, does this all become seamless? Is this something that you feel like, is there going to be a big data expert or is it like social media? At some point there was a social media expert and then it became, well, this is just part of how our marketing should be. So do you see the same thing happening with big data, where is there going to be an expert on this, or does everyone downstream turn into some kind of big data analyst of some kind?
The public sector is a unique kind of beast. You see it like the rollout of Obamacare and the trying to develop a website was
Expensive.
overwhelming, right? Literally, and they finally they worked out the bugs, but you see that all over the place. Anytime there's big kind of technology projects in the public sector, it's very often burdened with all kinds of problems. And there's some of that has to do with government contracting issues and other pieces. But I think at the end of the day, the public sector has to get much more adept at addressing things like you're seeing in the private sector, but still layer on top of that all of the controls that in the private sector you don't necessarily have to worry about as much. All the privacy issues and things are way heightened in the public side. But so some big giant data system that's going to suddenly unify everything, don't hold your breath. I mean, because the costs are so huge, and you have so many kind of legacy issues, and I think we'll probably be struggling with those things for as far out as you can see.
From my perspective, I think that everyone is going to be able to be a master of their own data, and not in a sense of like being able to control companies selling it, but my hope is that we're definitely on the forefront of this, but of people being able to actually take ownership of what their organization, their nonprofit is doing with data, and how that they're actually using it to send emails effectively, to get donations and to grow the company or grow the campaign. that's where we're going towards, for everyone to be able to have that power and to be able to deliver more effective results, because at the end of the day, data is going to drive a really successful campaign. It's going to drive a really successful fundraiser. To be able to, target and communicate effectively requires data. My hope is that we can really deliver that to as many people as possible to make it as accessible to any organization who is in a data-driven mindset.
So who wins? And I say this, as you're talking, I'm thinking, when someone comes to me now, and finally I figured out what this was, they're like, we're in the retargeting business. And I'm like, oh, you're the company that stalks me on Google or Facebook because you knew I went to this site to look at this dress. And now the dress is following me everywhere I surf, and it freaks me out, right? So going back to, again, Alex, when you said with the Facebook, I remember specifically in every stage of its development, we collectively would freak out when they changed their privacy settings or they did something sneaky, and you'd see it all in the news. But then we'd go, you know what? But I have to share pictures of my grandson with my son with his grandma, so I'm just gonna forget, and we get complacent. So who influences who in a situation? Do the big companies just try to get away with as much as they can, and we just end up taking it? Or do you see an awareness amongst us start to go, you know what, I don't want that dress following me anymore when I'm looking up stuff online? Like, who wins down the road, you see?
Well, I mean, everybody has to find their own personal philosophy, but mine is that we have to use the powers of dark magic for good. So I think I want to see nonprofits, and that includes public radio. I want to see governments on the national and local level. I want them to be super sophisticated about data. I want them to steal all the dirty tricks that commercial companies are doing to maximize revenues. And then I want them to turn around and use those techniques effectively to single-mindedly pursue their cause of choice.
Solve world issues.
Whether it's informing the public, whether it's educating our children, whether it's creating jobs. I think we need to be savvy. We need to try to hire the best and the brightest and solve these problems where it matters.
Yeah, I think you also need to look at, you really have to educate students, children, about data privacy issues, how to be a smart consumer, how to think about, sort of all of these issues of where their information goes. In terms of, sort of these big, huge battles that are going on, whether it's net neutrality or whatnot, at the end of the day, it's kind of like follow the money. That's what's driving this. There's huge dollars involved, and so policy is often following the dollars, or the dollars are influencing the policy.
Got it. Do we have any questions in the audience? I don't know if there's any separate mics, or maybe just speak up. I noticed some people were chatting. Yes, they're coming right there.
Oh, okay. First, I'll identify myself as a deep geek long ago, so maybe I'm an old geek now. I'm not a girl geek. I have a problem with the term big data. It suggests lots of data, but really what's been talked about in these contexts is standardizing data so you can share data, so you can expose data. So I'm hearing things like better software underlying all this so that you don't have to be a geek to be able to ask a question and get an answer out of all this data, because it's now massaged better and stuff like that. I mean, there is big data when Facebook or Google or somebody is tracking every move from page to page of every user. They've got a lot of data. But putting that aside, the other thing I'm hearing is that people have to get used to being able to just, since they can answer questions, hopefully, to just think creatively about what might be in the data. And where in that are the jobs, putting aside technology sophistication to, make the database run faster and all that. And can we get rid of the term big data and get something that really reaches all the dimensions that have been talked about tonight?
Anyone else there? Oh, we've got more questions. Did you want to answer the question? Oh, did you? I feel like he was making a statement. It's interesting, yeah.
I would say.
Would you say it's a
I
buzzword?
don't like the term
Yeah.
either. I think I like the term small data better. But there's this kind of interesting concept that we're talking about today, which is the difference between hot data and cold data. All of those numbers that are pulling from the website interactions and all those, thousands of numbers and columns on spreadsheets, that's rarely touched, right? Like that's huge level data, which doesn't impact the day-to-day. But hot data is, an organization knowing the correct phone number to call for a donor, or the correct address to send a mailing to, or, if that person is following you on social media, like very relevant data to you that impacts the growth of an organization, the success of a campaign, that can be really tangible and usable on a day-to-day basis, and to not just think about big data as these enormous analytics and this huge data set that no one can really wrap their mind around.
I'm with Maya. I prefer small data as well. However, sometimes the term big data comes in handy, especially if you're convincing people to talk to each other, whether you're trying to convince different departments to talk to each other, or you're trying to convince different organizations to talk to each other, because then you can make the argument, look, if we just all pooled that data and of course have appropriate controls when it comes to who can access that data, we can just learn so much more. So I think there are certain contexts where that phrase can sometimes help break down silos.
Like a conversation starter. Let's talk about big data. Everyone collectively at the table.
Hi, I'm Peter Hunt. I'm from the VA. So we talk about data, we have data.
Wow.
The question I have is, when Christine posed the question, what challenges you see when you're working with big data, the panel talks a lot about interagency, cultural differences, and your clients and whatnot. One of the big things that we see in a big organization like this is actually internal politics of big data. Because everybody uses data, or expect to use data in the VA, right? But you have so many different professionals. You have physicians, nurses, you have engineers, and you have tech people, program people. Everybody speaks a different language, and everybody uses data, value data, and see data, and expectation of data is very different. And a lot of times that creates a lot of, I would say, conflict in institutions, and it sort of lost the value of data per se, big data, or small data, whatever you call it. So I just want to ask the panel, I'm sure in your organization you've seen this, is there a solution that we can probably come up with, maybe a common language, a common way? We're not even talking about cross-disciplinary, but we also talk about generational issues too. We have a lot of nurses and doctors in the field for 30 years or 40 years, and there are a lot of young people coming into the healthcare system too. And they're all speaking different languages, and the way they see data also is very different. So I just want to see whether you have any experience or any advice. How do you deal with such issue internally in a big organization?
We're working on a bill right now that is incentivizing data linkage. Again, hard to do when you can't attach large amounts of dollars, but a lot of it isn't about the money. It's about sort of convincing various agencies that sharing information is going to produce better outcomes, and then looking at kind of the right vehicle to do that, like a interoperability agreement or a data sharing MOU across, not just like this department to this department, but across child welfare. Anything that touches on child welfare issues, any agency should then be part of this agreement. So we're trying to look at different ways to think about how to incentivize all of those, silos to start to, build connections and It's hard for all the reasons that have been brought up.
But you said cost is an issue too, I noticed. So,
mean-
say you had the budget, would you still be running across the issues he described?
In a conversation I had today with someone in one of the human service departments, what he said was, it isn't about the money, it's about the culture of the agency in terms of wanting to let go and start to interface with other agencies, and you can figure out ways to do it. It's really more about, should we spend any of our resources reaching out to somebody else when it's not clear what is the benefit for us, and why is someone requiring it or not?
So it's silos that
Yeah,
you're
it's
talking
silos are a giant issue.
So therein lies the answer. So you have to figure out if you're having a project. This is, by the way, true for any major project that involves multiple departments or multiple agencies. You have to talk to each constituency, to each department, to every agency. You have to figure out what they want, and then you have to turn around to them and explain to them how the project that you're proposing will solve a problem for them. So what problem does it solve for the nurses? What problem does it solve for the doctors? What problem does it solve for the programmers? And that's how you get buy-in.
I would just say, to your point, I think the biggest thing is the outcome. Ultimately, probably everyone at the VA wants healthy vets. I think everybody wants that, but I think that ultimately, in the end of the day, like, what is the outcome? And everybody in that organization should share a vision of the outcome, and how do you get there? How do you increase, or increase success rates, or what does that look like, and how can each department contribute to getting on the same page in that? I think the outcome is the driver. Right.
Hi. Okay. I also have a question for you, Ed. I work with a social impact company. We do e-waste recycling. We hire people with barriers to work, and I wish Jan hadn't left, but anyway. So how is government going to talk to one another? I mean, in my experience with government is you don't get rewarded for making a good decision, but you do get severely punished if you make a bad decision. You mentioned there's a bill that's coming through. Is that from the governor's office, or how do you tear down these silos? Because we're an excellent organization, but getting through the maze of bureaucracy is ridiculous.
The bill I was referring to is something that Senator Liu will be carrying, and we're working out the details of sort of how to get the most leverage out of the bill. Government in many ways isn't ultimately that different than a big corporation or other large institutions, and you see the same kinds of silos in the corporate side. You see the same kind of yes, maybe this will increase sales, but I've really got to cover my butt here in my department, and those kinds of issues. Some of that is about leadership. Sometimes it's also about sort of either finding the points where you can incentivize something, or in the from the legislative side, sometimes you can mandate things. So making large bureaucracies, public or private, more responsive is generally a challenge. And you see it more in kind of entrepreneurial, innovative technology companies that tend to be very nimble and are doing cutting edge stuff. Sometimes they're way ahead of the legal sort of framework because it hasn't been developed yet. Maybe that allows them to be more nimble.
We're like small enough, no one's paying attention.
Yeah. So yeah, the big challenges, but I think there is a real interest in some of this. I think maybe comes out of this Great Recession. It had a little bit of a silver lining in that it caused people to realize they had to rethink the way they were doing business because they couldn't operate under these huge budget cuts without doing something different. And so it did kind of create some opportunities for people to start to rethink how they interacted with other agencies, doing more cross-agency collaboration, et cetera. And we certainly want to keep that going.
I have a question. I have worked in the pharmaceutical company, and pharmaceutical company lived by data from discovery of the drug to the selling of the drug. How you can define a privacy? Back then, privacy was like readily privacy. People doesn't know about anything else. today, I mean, everybody know about everybody. What you define the privacy, once you are on the net, you are naked. Everybody knows about you. So can you define what is the privacy nowadays and how we can work with this politics of big data?
That dress following me around, I'm telling you. That was the first time I'm like, this is not cool. No, do you have any comments on that? I mean, I know we touched upon privacy earlier, but...
You know, I think this is only going to get more complicated
Yeah.
and continue because, you know, there's a lot of value and dollars associated with having all of this information. And, you know, the individual often gets lost in that. So, you know, first of all, it's most of this is way more complicated than the average, you know, even Facebook users. I'm just pulling this number out of total thin air, but I bet 3/4, 80% or more never look at their privacy settings, wouldn't know what to do with, you know, it unless maybe somebody, you know, puts it, you know, posts it or something and says, quick, go and do this, there was a change. So, I mean, it's really a lot about trying to educate consumers about where those lines are, what options they've got, how to stay, you know, protected.
But whose responsibility is that? Like, that's what I was saying. It's like, Facebook certainly isn't going to say, hey, just to let you know, we've changed and these are the implications.
I mean,
yeah.
To me, it's like, on the one hand, it's the, you know, individual's responsibility. But at the same time, I think it's also the government's responsibility to raise up the issues and say, you know, look, there are lines that should not be crossed. You know, there should be certain protections built in because the consumer isn't going to know certain things. They're not going to be able to, you know, operate at a level that, you know, major corporations are, and, you know, there are privacy rights that should be inherent.
We have a gentleman. Oh, there's one in the back and then gentleman.
So one thing that I think needs to be considered is the definition of the word geek. Because in corporate America, you have to ask for insight from the big data people or even the business intelligence people from years ago, right? Nobody is sitting on the business side saying, we found X. So how do you get the business world, or on your side, the operational staff, to convert over or to move over to the dark side of geekiness so that the operational people can know what's going on without asking the question?
I mean, you know, I think let me know if that's getting at your question, but I think what came up earlier and what the gentleman here was raising earlier is that we really have to think about how is that data distributed in our organizations. Now, you know, on the second floor in this building is our newsroom, and in every corner of the newsroom there are big monitors. And you know, my team managing the website has taken over a couple of those monitors and shows at any given moment how many people are listening to the live stream. So this is aggregate information. This is not individual information. So how many people are listening to the live stream? How many people are on the website? What's the most popular story? And we, you know, one of the monitors is right next to the elevator, and you know, when people come off and are waiting for the elevator, they turn around and they stare at the monitor, and that's exactly what it's there for, so that people just sort of passively take in, are aware that this information is out there, that they can consume it. So, you know, for different companies, that's different things, but I think we have to think about what dashboards can we build that just pop up when you first log onto your computer in the morning? Are there, you know, monitors and gathering places where you can just sort of casually display some interesting metrics about the business? And I think that just encourages a data-driven culture and sort of an awareness in the company that that information is out there and available.
Okay, going back to the politics of big data, and you mentioned the responsibility of the individual. I want to talk a little bit more about that, mainly because the policies that we have in place from a big data standpoint do not reflect the consumer. They are heavily swayed in favor of the corporations. I'm not so much concerned about the information that we have within the government, because it seems that there's only a release of that data when somebody hacks into the system, and same with hospitals. But things as simple as the do not call registry. We know how that is preserved, or not at all. What can we as women, as scientific women, as women that have children, as women that have families, as women that look to the future and to the next generation, what can we concretely be passing off as far as protective items? From a policy standpoint, Ed, maybe that's more in your arena because you work in the government. Alex, what you see as far as in your division too, concrete things. And the reason I'm stressing concrete is because we can say to children, you need to be smart about this. We live in a digital age. You cannot even walk down the street and remain anonymous. The minute you use your cell phone, every single piece of data is controlled. It's recorded. It's streamed. You have no rights to that. That's been shown time and time again in lawsuits. So from the sanctity of our homes, what we really only have is what's in under the roof. But even that, we can get sketchy with. So again, concrete things from a policy standpoint. Where would you like to see policy go? I think it's kind of obvious where I'd like to see policy go. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll start, even though, maybe others can answer that question better. I have a 7-year-old who wants to do Minecraft videos and put them on YouTube. And this morning, Nick Bilton wrote an interesting op-ed in the New York Times talking about when is it appropriate for children to be on social media. And I encourage you to check it out. And I'm sure that many of you will wildly disagree with him. But I think it's an important discussion to have. And it's something that, I guess because this is the Girl Geek Dinner, so as girls and as women and as mothers and as fathers, we have to worry about that, and I worry about that. Concretely, yes, I think about that, and I think about it for my own children. And I can just tell you, as an individual, I would be attracted to any politician, male or female, who makes that part of their platform and has some interesting things to say on the topic that give me some peace of mind. So I think it's just a question of time until that becomes part of a political platform. And then the concrete thing to do is to either vote or not vote for that person. I mean, I hope that's not an oversimplified way of answering your question.
So I think that the policy is going to go where people want it to go. If everyone in this room feels passionately that you want a policy that's going to be more protective of your data, start organizing that, organize around that issue, and bring people together to impact policy. Policy is driven by, decision makers, but ultimately, the people in this room, the voters, are going to make a decision, and you have the power to influence that decision. So I don't think you should feel like you need to sit back and wait, or sit back and, till someone is elected or there's a politician running. Get somebody elected that you want in that office, work for them to fight for, increased data privacy laws. And I think that's in our power.
Just a comment to that. We've seen the laws in place for places like AT&T, who have exemption. And if we want to debate AT&T as a consumer, we're actually forced into arbitration by an attorney of their choosing. Again, we don't have rights to our own data. And there are folks out there who are pressing for more streamlined control over personal data, people like Elizabeth Warren from other states. But again, I would like to see more development in the ways of applications for controls, for parental controls, from a user standpoint. Something much more comprehensive. I guess I should have, thrown that out earlier. Things that are more usable. Yes, from voting is definitely a way to accomplish things, except it's very, very slow. We've already put in our wish list as a nation on what we want, and we haven't gotten our way.
I mean, I think again, you know, there's a dynamic of the policy, you know, follows and is slower than the technology development. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of things, because often, you know, the political process is reactive to things happening. You know, something, you know, it's like the new signal at the intersection goes in after the accident, because people are outraged, and you know, so that kind of dynamic is happening all the time. But the other piece of it too is we can't get so overprotective of the data that you lose the ability to use it effectively in areas where you can really improve public policy, improve outcomes. So there's kind of a balance in there of sort of the privacy rights, using the data within kind of parameters so that you don't violate people's rights, but also don't paralyze the system so that nobody, you know, is sharing anything, because there's downsides to that.
Question?
Okay, so I pretty much have, I guess, a comment and then 2 questions. So in regards to big data and the word big, I think big helps with anonymity with people, and they feel more comfortable with the word big, because that doesn't mean small, because small means this room, and that means me, right? So I think there's a comfort with the word big, and being grouped together, because people naturally like to be grouped together. Okay, so question is in regards to school districts and use of that educational data that then follows you the rest of your life and prevents you from getting into Harvard or wherever you may want to go just because you punched a kid in 2nd grade. So I think it has a lot to do with security of that data, and like what happened at Blue Cross Blue Shield. You just got hacked, and so I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of people running around with other people's identifications and sold to whomever is coming into the country. But anyways, so that's kind of what I'm primarily thinking in regards to school, is how secure is that actual information? And if we're running, sprinting, we know that the government is not necessarily all there in regards to security and cleanup, right? Especially with things that come together and they're huge. Second question is, Obama kind of flipped the script on everyone. I mean, he's kind of really revolutionary in that way, of how he ran his campaign, hiring the kid from Facebook, pretty much. So how has that changed moving forward, especially with the presidential elections that are coming up right now, and the Republicans kind of waking up and realizing, holy crap, you know? So just wanting to know with you specifically, because I think Obama's pretty much like woke everyone up to saying, oh my gosh, we can actually use this is relevant, this is actually getting people who use the internet, young people, to vote, so.
Yeah, he definitely was a driving force behind data-driven campaigns. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that campaign and actually see how effective it was to really use data to have a really successful, conversation with someone who is an undecided voter, because they use data to basically figure that out. And that's definitely sparked interest from all parties, and has lifted the barriers to running for office. Like, the main driver of Nation Builder is to be able to have anybody run for office who has the will or the want to change that policy, to have a stand on an issue, who wasn't previously able to have access to any data or any ability to raise money or to talk to voters. And bringing that to a local level is empowering for any party or any person who has a desire to run. And yeah, that means, that means Republicans, and that means, all the Democrats that are going to run too, that they have this new ability to take what they learned from that campaign and continue to improve upon it. There's many new and emerging technologies around campaigns. You're going to see a lot of them coming out more and more heavily as the election approaches, and it's going to be exciting to see what data is going to drive.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, in terms of like the issues of, kind of hacking, into these huge databases and all of that, I mean, at the end of the day, that's driven, again, that's a function of there's money in that information, right? If I can get your social security number, date of birth, certain information, there's a whole marketplace out there willing to, to buy that. If you go on and look, because again, there was some recent legislation, if you look at the Attorney General's website, this is in California Attorney General's website, Department of Justice, you'll see a whole section around kind of data privacy issues. Companies are now required, if they're aware of their data getting hacked, they have to report it to the Department of Justice, which then posts it on their website, and you can see, the latest thing popping up, whether it's, and it's everything from the Sausalito Yacht Club to Target and Home Depot. So, there are attempts to try and make consumers more aware of, information breaches, to require companies to divulge it, because, there's, on a certain level, an incentive for them not to say, hey, guess what, we just got hacked, and their stocks dive, and, so, there's stuff happening out there, on the education side. Those systems, I don't know that they can get monetized in the same way that other consumer data can, and so there's probably not the kind of hacking going on, except for maybe, there's probably a whole lot of students trying to get to the test question answers or something, but we haven't seen that yet. Maybe there's, maybe that's next.
Okay, well, thank you. I believe that was our last question. Thank you very much to the panel. And, it's interesting for me. I spent the last 20 years involved in cross-border China business, and I say that because there was a 5-year period that I lived in China. And that's relevant after talking to all of you, because when I step off a plane in Shanghai, I just assume that they know everything about me, because that's just the nature of how they do business and the government there. But again, going back to where I see things now, just personally for me, I don't see that much difference when I come back to the U.S. sometimes, in terms of I don't think I have a malicious government who's going to maybe do something with my data the way that you kind of feel a little paranoid when you're in China. But you do feel this sense of there's no privacy anymore. And so I just wanted to note that. And it's weird because it's such a contrast, because we spend so much time contrasting the U.S. versus a country like China. But actually, it's not that different when it comes to the privacy issue. And I think that might present an opportunity for us to really get our act together collectively to change that, because I certainly don't want to feel uncomfortable here the way I do there. But it's fascinating. But thank you so much for the insights, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight.